With all the terrible events and drama surrounding the coronavirus, we often get distracted from what should be the core point of all of this. Viruses are unavoidable, but this particular one has the Chinese Communist Party to blame for its existence. Whether it came from an animal in a disgusting and unsanitary market in Wuhan or escaped from a lab, the Chinese government attempted to lie, deny, and cover this up as long as possible. They are responsible for the death and sickness of millions of people and for the trillions upon trillions of dollars in economic damage that has been inflicted as a result. We must do more as a country and as an international community to hold this corrupt government criminally and financially responsible for a pandemic which they bear ultimate responsibility and blame for. The CCP thinks they can get away with this and balks at any suggestion that they are responsible for what has transpired. We can start by wiping out the $1.1 trillion in debt the U.S. owes China and put that towards the expenses they are responsible for. But we should and we must go much farther than that.
The Chinese government is highly culpable for their part in the global spread of COVID-19. The CCP suppressed early signs of its spread, concealed key facts to its nature, silenced local officials and health experts, and even lied about lethality and death rates. This lack of transparency all likely prevented the world from addressing the virus early on. This consequently led to thousands of deaths that might have been otherwise preventable. Still, what else should we expect from the CCP, a genocidal government currently placing millions of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang prison camps? All of this is undeniable. However, we cannot overlook our own government's failures when considering the spread of coronavirus in the United States. That is, China's failures to the world cannot be an excuse for our own. The Trump administration not only failed to take on swift action, but facilitated the spread of conspiracy theories, set up a lack of proper testing early on, and explicitly lied to the American public about the seriousness of the coronavirus. A virus that has taken more than 191,000 Americans. In a word, insofar as we want to take seriously the current moment and learn from it, we need to recognize and learn from those mistakes.
Hello and welcome back to another Millennial Minute. Today's topic, should China be held responsible for the pandemic? You've already heard from our guests, both friends of Bold, Anthony DiMauro. He's a contributor for Young Voices, and Ajay, Bruno, a media strategist. So we both agree that China was largely responsible for what happened. Where we disagree is how the U.S. response contributed to our own misery. Ajay, let's start with you. Do you think we did a good job on that front?
Well, it could have been done a lot better, obviously. I think some steps were done in the right way, but at the same time, look at the way people are behaving in general. I think we can't blame that necessarily on government policy. We have people running around. There was that huge Sturgis rally a few weeks ago. We had hundreds of thousands of people in one place. They called it a super spreader event. Things like this could easily, make the problem spiral out of control. That's why we have states now where we're seeing these huge spikes. People lose patience. They, don't realize that or don't care what they're doing is going to make the situation get more out of control. So we can talk about policy all we want, but at the end of the day, people need to be personally responsible, and a lot haven't been, and that's why we've seen numbers we shouldn't be seeing when you consider, places like Australia. It's pretty squashed there. Compared to what we have here, where it's really gotten more out of control than it should be.
A little more isolated, Ajay, but speaking, Anthony, about Sturgis, right? The governor of South Dakota said it was fine, didn't require masks. So where do we draw the line between policy and culture, Anthony?
Sure, and there's no doubt that America has a more individualistic, Jamesian, libertarian type of culture.
We're all like that, right?
Of course, but let's not pretend that policy has no impact. I mean, you brought up Australia. I think that's a great example. Similar circumstances as far as administrations, both led by conservative leaders. The difference is Australia's Prime Minister Morrison took seriously the virus early on insofar as he actually placed restrictions on travel that did not have the massive holes in it that the Trump administration's policies did. The oft-cited campaign slogan is, "We shut down China travel," very early on. Actually, it was about around the same time that 45 other countries had already put travel restrictions on, and about 40,000 people arrived in the U.S. Shortly after that policy was enacted on direct flights from China. So to pretend like policy has no impact on public health and it's solely an issue of personal choices and culture is just simplifying the problem.
So, AJ, I want to speak to something that I saw covered in the paper recently, which said whether Joe Biden or Donald Trump are president, right? Their China policy is going to be quite similar, in fact. And Trump kind of moved the needle permanently on China. And even here, we have a liberal and a conservative agreeing that China is definitely culpable. Why do you think the needle has permanently moved on China? And here in America, we're more concerned going forward about our relationship and China's relationship with the rest of the world?
Well, I guess that's the one positive that can come out of this. China has long been a threat. And we see the way they behave in this whole situation, where they were so dishonest. The whole government, it's all about protecting their regime there. So I think people are finally realizing people are dying. They're losing money. Their entire lifestyle has been disrupted. And it's ultimately because of China. Yes, I think the administration response here has been mixed, and it could have been better in some ways. But we have to get back to the root problem here, the root core issue. It's because of China this virus exists to begin with. If it wasn't for the Chinese government, the corrupt, authoritarian, communist regime there, that's oppressed people in Hong Kong, it has people in concentration camps, the Uyghurs. If it wasn't for that mindset, we would not be in this situation. So something has to be done about China, and we can't just let this go. This has to be a red line. We draw it in the sand, and something must be done. And I hope people don't have a short memory in this, because we need to make more dramatic change in our policy towards China.
Anthony, I know it doesn't fit the narrative, but one of the things the Trump administration did well, as applauded by liberals and both conservatives, is treating China differently and holding China accountable. The left always talked, but they never really acted. Trump was the first president to actually apply pressure. Would you agree?
I would agree is if you understand holding China accountable in terms of tariffs, trade policy, and talking big talk. But again, I think that if you look at trade policy and protectionism in general, it's actually had a pretty disastrous impact in our economy. So again, when we talk about holding China accountable, I think we need to be very specific about what we're talking about. I'm not sure anybody reasonable would disagree on how awful China's government is, how many evils they've perpetuated into the world. But again, I'm really not sure when you say Trump has held China accountable. What do we mean by that? And I think if you tell me specific instances about how and what impact he's had policy-wise outside of sloganeering, I might be able to address that question better.
Fair point. But AJ, a lot of times culture, policy is downstream from culture. And culturally, we're sitting here talking more about China. We're talking about the problems that emerged from that country. That's quite a radical change from 5 years ago, isn't it?
It's a huge change. I mean, this is something I've always been concerned about. But the population, the public in general, we're not talking about it. This is not in the news. So it's good that this is something people are actually focused on now. It obviously started with some of the actions they've been taking before the pandemic, but now it comes right to their doorstep. I think when you have an issue like this, it comes right to you, and we know where it comes from. We know that this could have at the very least been much less worse than it was. So this is something people are forced to address now. So I hope they don't forget about it. I hope regardless of who's in charge, more aggressive action has to be taken. Like I said, we have to start with saying we've had trillions of dollars in economic damage. We owe this amount of money to China. We're not going to pay it because they've devastated our economy. They're responsible. They have to be held accountable. And we must do this in any possible way we can from a political and economic perspective.
Yeah, and you might agree with that, Anthony, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that they are certainly the root cause of a problem that could have been not as bad as it was. But again, I don't want China to become a complete scapegoat for American politicians and policymakers, insofar as it's good to have the conversation and recognize the root problem that is the CCP's failures. But to pretend that the United States did not have their own failures and merely hand-waving at the Chinese is just not going to cut it. I think we need to deal with the fact that we had to restrict testing for multiple weeks at the onset here because of a failure on the CDC. I think we had mixed messaging with regard to masks and other social distancing requirements.
And I don't think AJ disagrees with you. We're out of time, Anthony, but thank you both for this very spirited conversation and very important topic.
Of course. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Good to be here.
And thank you all for watching. Have a great day.